welcome to another episode of Behind the Screen. This week, a couple things to talk about. First of all, if you tuned in last week, then you know that I was kind of ragging on Roll20 a little bit. So the group that I'm playing on Roll20 with, we all decided, just some of them watched the video. Hey guys, hi everybody. Okay, so there was a discussion amongst the group, and we are going to try using actual video, like cams, in addition to having our Discord chat up on Sunday. So hopefully that will improve my experience. Now, if you didn't watch the video from last week, you can obviously check it out. But what I was talking about is that I felt the disconnect, because it was my first time playing online. There was definitely a disconnect versus playing in person, which was, you know, a little disappointing because I love D&D. This is the thing that I've like fallen in love with. I'm making videos about it. It's all I ever want to talk about. It's all I ever want to do. And I played online for the first time, and suddenly I don't feel that same joy. So I'm hoping that by being able to see other people's faces and sort of interpret their like facial expressions, it's going to create more of a connection. I actually had a really great conversation online with a friend of mine from the internets, you know, and we were just talking about there's a lot of room for growth when it comes to platforms like Roll20, and no one has found the magic bullet yet. There's not a sweet spot that anybody has particularly met. So there's always going to be that disconnect because you're not in the same room as them. But that being said, we will see how cams work and how it goes in the future. The other thing I wanted to talk about today was a mini controversy that came up this past week because of something that happened on Critical Role. There was actually a big conversation that happened on Reddit after this past week's episode, where Matt had decided that Laura rolled a 1. Okay, spoilers a little bit if you haven't watched Critical Role season 2 or campaign 2 episode 7. But Laura's character Jester, she rolls a 1 and he made her drop her scimitar. She, like, it happens. And there was a discussion on Reddit about the use of critical fails and about how this would be built into the campaign, and if this is a mechanic that Matt is going to be using. And he actually responded in Reddit and on Twitter talking about how this is from a narrative aspect and not necessarily from a mechanical aspect, which I really appreciated, because I think when you're coming into a situation like that, and if you aren't aware that it's a narrative aspect of you roll a natural 1, something terrible is going to happen, you drop your blade. If you're specifically a fighter who only does attacks with their blade, then that is, like, if you're using martial weapons, then that's a problem. And I think that that was what the user on Reddit, which I should get his name, Kane222, yes, Kane222, that was what he was trying to say, is like there's an opportunity for there to be sort of a dissuasion in some ways of people wanting to play, because you are stuck in this situation where there's a definite percentage that you're going to roll a 1 when you roll a die, and as you get to higher levels you can critically fail and it can really mess you up. I think Matt's response was really thoughtful, him saying that, you know, Jester, she's a cleric, she has other abilities other than hitting things with a scimitar. It was actually the first time she had ever attempted to hit anything with a scimitar. I think it added to the narrative aspect of the battle that they were in, and I agree with him. It adds to the flavor of the campaign. It doesn't necessarily detract from it, especially knowing going forward he's going to use this as a narrative driver and not as a results. This is not a consequence necessarily for every natural 1 that you roll. It just is something that can occasionally happen. It wasn't to necessarily the complete detriment of the party. Now, the other thing that happened was he rolled with advantage in an attack that one of the enemies did, and he said again that this was a narrative choice because of what had happened in that battle in and of itself. And I think it is at the DM's discretion as to what they can do in this situation. I think that really gets down to the point that I'm trying to make, is that anytime a DM goes into a campaign, into a session, into an encounter, they're thinking about, how can I make this as enjoyable as possible? At least from my opinion, how can I make this as enjoyable as possible for the players so that they feel like there's real stakes on the line, that they're invested in the fight, that they feel compelled by the story that is being told, and how do I make that even more exciting when something like a critical fail happens, or when something really dramatic happens that potentially could affect a monster or some sort of creature. Now, I think the point, to Matt's point, he said, you know, the things that were happening in the game when the monster had advantage, it made sense to him that they would get advantage, whereas there was no like rules as written, there was no reason for the monster to have advantage. He felt that it made sense, and I really appreciate that sort of like from 40,000 feet as the DM, thinking about how would not only the players react in the situation, but also how the creature or monster would react in this situation. And I think by balancing those two things, you're creating a better, more interesting, more interwoven story than you would if it was, okay, this is only stuff that happens to the party, the monster's just gonna go by the book. So I find that this sort of dichotomy of crit fail, advantage, the breaking, the quote breaking of the rules, so to speak, where these are not things necessarily that should happen mechanically in the game, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think it adds to the game in a way that you wouldn't get in a regular board game. That's the reason we're playing role-playing games, guys. That's the reason you have a DM who's leading this. You have a person with a brain running your game that you can play in, is so that they can make these game time decisions where they have something happen that is out of the ordinary, that is slightly fudges the rules or bends the rules a little bit to make it a more exciting, interesting player experience. And I think the thing that we've seen the most with 5e is that people are interested in it for the storytelling aspect. That's what drew me to it. That was what drawn a lot of people, especially people who watch Critical Role. That's the part that gets them, is the storytelling aspect. So Matt, in this situation, was literally just playing, using the dice to his favor to be able to play into that storytelling aspect. And we've seen him do that before in the other campaigns, I think because they're so low level, they're so squishy, that they're new characters, that, you know, he's trying new things, they're trying new things, there's more opportunity for failure. However, I don't think this was a failure on Matt's part. I think it was a good topic to bring up. I just wish that it hadn't turned sort of into the vitriol that occurred on the internet. So that's kind of my opinion on the entire situation. I know that pretty much everything has died down from it, but I do think that there's a very good point to be made for, this is the reason you have a DM, so that they can make calls like this. And while you may have DMs that are very like, rules as written, this is what it is, or you're gonna have rules as intended types of DMs, or you're just gonna have people who wanna play and have a great game. I think that's the spectrum of D&D, and that's what makes it so compelling and so interesting. So I just find it to be a very good example of what can make D&D amazing to any player coming in off the street. Although you do have to be aware that if you roll a natural 1, something bad is probably going to happen. There is a chance that you're not just going to miss, that your scimitar is going to go flying across the room. So I think that's a lesson to be learned. But you can't plan when to roll a natural 1. So I think that's going to be it today, guys. I kind of got up on a soapbox and I talked really high and mighty about stuff. Yeah. Do you have an opinion about this? How do you play it in your game? In my game, if someone rolls a natural 1, something silly is going to happen usually. I don't usually penalize my characters. Although I like Matt Mercer's approach of being able to say, okay, you know, you roll a natural 1, your scimitar goes across the room, but you have something to fall back on. You have spells, you have other ways to attack to defend yourself. I kind of like that. It's not a terrible plan. It wouldn't work necessarily with other characters, but in that situation it worked. So yes, how do you play in your game? How do you interpret the rules? Are you a rules as written and this is really bothering you, that it's not consistent across the board? And how do you feel about him giving the monsters the same advantages or disadvantages that he's giving the players? I personally think it just makes for a great story. So I think that's going to be it for today, guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and support on Patreon if you are so inclined. And make sure to tune in next week for more adventures behind the screen. Bye, guys.